Dragonborn have been a lot of things in D&D 5e, but it seems there's even more to explore now. So my scaly friends, let's take a look at Dragonborn through the eyes of Fizban and his Treasury of Dragons. As I mentioned, Dragonborn have been a lot of things in D&D 5e, and that is to say that they and where they come from is generally not understood very well. Some of that has to do with Wizards of the Coast providing some potentially unclear or misleading information over the years, and part of that has to do with the plethora of other dragon-based races that have popped up in D&D. Without going too far into the specific differences between a Dragonborn and other races like kobolds, half-dragons, lizard folk, draconians, and the like, let's just touch on the definition of this race. To start, Dragonborn are not offspring of a dragon and a human. The player's handbook doesn't give us much detail, but what it does say is that Dragonborn are their own separate race created by draconic gods or dragons themselves, not a hybrid race. So they are a bit like kobolds in that respect. They were created by dragons, except better in almost every way, although they don't have tails or wings like some kobolds are known to have. It goes on to say that they do hatch from eggs and that they reproduce with their own kind. They typically fall around 6.5 feet as an adult and live to about 80 years old, and have scales that match the color and luster of their draconic ancestor, likely referring to the dragon or god that created them. So although they're a humanoid race, they're no more human than a turtle or a tabaxi, and seemingly they're only draconic in nature due to their being made in their creator's image. Now that that's all settled, and before it gets too muddied down with too many extra details, what does Fizban say that Dragonborn are? Well, the Treasury of Dragons doubles down on the lore of the player's handbook while also stating that Dragonborn are the most direct way to reflect a character with dragons somewhere far back in their ancestry. So then, are we to believe that these Dragonborn are actually a human-dragon hybrid race? My own interpretation is not so, but I wouldn't blame you if you ruled it differently in your games or at your table. The intention behind their wording here is to give people hoping to play something like a humanoid dragon descendant mechanics and rules for their characters, so while they're not Dragonborn, they'll look and operate mechanically just like them. And speaking of mechanics, I think it's finally time to dive into what changed with Fizban's Treasury as it relates to the original Dragonborn entry within the player's handbook. The first thing you'll probably notice is that the Dragonborn's innate breath weapon functions quite a bit differently, and that doesn't stop at the area of effect and saving throw that depends on the specific type of Dragonborn you're playing. Here's a table of those breath weapons and the types of Dragonborn that they correspond to, since it is totally viable to continue playing the older version of Dragonborn instead of using the new subraces in Fizban's Treasury. Although you probably won't want to after hearing about the latter. For one, the old Dragonborn breath weapon started off with a better 2d6 damage roll, but scaled only by adding a single d6 at 6th level, 11th level, and 16th level. Additionally, you could only use that breath weapon once per long or short rest. The new breath weapon starts at 1d10, but scales an additional d10 at 5th, 11th, and 17th level. And it also allows you to use it a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest. That alone, in my opinion, is a vast improvement, but that's still not everything that's changed. The old breath weapon required an action to use it, and while that still might hold true for some builds, it can be easy to overlook that the new entries state that you may use your breath weapon instead of one of your attacks when you take the attack action. Suddenly, builds that get multiple attacks out of a single attack action are looking at this feature a lot more fondly. I can definitely see this new breath weapon being used much more often as a great area of effect burst option in the midst of other martial attacks for some real action economy bang for buck. You'll also notice that the new variants, whether you like it or not, have adopted the recent change in view by Wizards of the Coast as it relates to racial ability score increases. The player's handbook would have you increase your strength by 2 and your charisma by 1, while Fizban says it's totally cool to give yourself a +2 to any stat and a +1 to any other stat, or a +1 to 3 separate stats. Personally, I'm a fan, but you could always homebrew something a little bit more restrictive if you're a fan of the old way but still want all of the new goodies that come with the new Dragonborn subraces. And the last apples to apples change that has been made is a relatively small one, allowing you to pick language proficiency in addition to common instead of forcing you to choose Draconic. Everything else these new subraces do for us that's different, they do in addition to the base Dragonborn from the player's handbook. So without further ado, let's dive in, starting with what hasn't changed across all of the Dragonborn options.
For starters, Dragonborn always like and subscribe. They are, in fact, honor-bound to do so. You have my thanks.
Jokes aside, Dragonborn are medium-sized humanoid creatures with a base walking speed of 30 feet. You should note, however, that none of them have dark vision, a sore point for Dragonborn of the past that has carried through to all of the new versions. All Dragonborn also get a feature called Draconic Resistance that grants you resistance to a damage type corresponding to the type of Dragonborn that you are, and the damage that your breath weapon does. And although much has changed with respect to the breath weapon, the save DC has not, keeping the same 8 plus your constitution modifier plus your proficiency bonus save DC calculation. Now let's get cracking on some of the fun new stuff, beginning with the Chromatic Dragonborn. First, you'll choose a type of Chromatic Dragonborn from this table, dictating the color of your Dragonborn as well as its resistance and the damage that its breath weapon does. And when it comes to the Chromatic Dragonborn, your breath weapon will always be a 30-foot line that is 5 foot wide, requiring a dex save for half damage. I like that the damage pattern has been consolidated in this way, even though we'll see that the area of effect is different for the other Dragonborn subraces. It does simplify things a bit. Next, this flavor of Dragonborn will get a feature called Chromatic Warding, an ability that comes online at 5th level and allows you to, as an action, make yourself immune to the damage type corresponding to your Dragonborn for a minute. You can only do this once per long rest, but that's really not bad for an extra feature that we just flat didn't have before. But if you like that, just wait until you see the extra goodies that we get with the other two subraces. Moving on to the Gem Dragonborn. As before, we have another table for Gem Dragonborn and their corresponding damage types to choose from. And, as before, we'll gain a damage resistance and a breath weapon that corresponds to that damage type. However, this breath weapon attack is a 15-foot cone with a dexterity saving throw for half damage. Personally, I prefer this area of effect to a straight line like the Chromatic Dragonborn, but it doesn't even stop here. We'll also get 2 more abilities in Psionic Mind and at 5th level, Gem Flight. The former allows us to send telepathic messages to any creature that we can see within 30 feet, without the need for a shared language. The creature need only understand at least one language in order to comprehend the message. And Gem Flight grants us the ability to create spectral wings for a minute as a bonus action, giving us a flying speed equal to our walking speed and allowing us to hover for the duration, to stay aloft if we're knocked prone or have our speed reduced to 0 while we're in the air. From there, we won't be able to do so again until we finish a long rest, and while some races get flight with no time limit, I should remind you that all this is extra compared to what we had with the Dragonborn of old. And that holds true with our last entry as well. Of course, the Metallic Dragonborn. Again, we'll choose from a list of Dragonborn colors that correspond to a damage type that we'll use for our resistance and a breath weapon. And just the same as the last option, that breath weapon will be a 15-foot cone with a dexterity saving throw for half damage. But that's actually not the only breath weapon that we get as a Metallic Dragonborn. We'll also get a Metallic breath weapon at 5th level, completely separate from the first. It too will be a 15-foot cone, and it can also be used as a replacement for one of our attacks when we take the attack action. But when you use this one, you'll have the option to choose between Enervating Breath and Repulsion Breath. Enervating Breath requires creatures make a Constitution saving throw or become incapacitated until the start of our next turn, and Repulsion Breath, also known as Fus Roda, will require a Strength save against being pushed 20 feet away and being knocked prone. While neither of these deal any damage, the effects that they offer are absolutely fantastic. Being able to incapacitate several enemies at once can really turn the tides of a battle, and I, for one, can't wait to try sending a few baddies tumbling off of a cliff with my Repulsion Breath. Just do be warned that whichever option you do go with, you can only use your Metallic Breath weapon once per long rest. Even still, I'll remind you a third time, this is all in addition to what the old Dragonborn race had for us. And it needed the love, honestly. But now I can't help but imagine what characters I might make utilizing some of these new abilities in the future. If you're as excited as I am for that, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of those builds. And if you'd like to add even more draconic flavor to your new Dragonborn, be sure to check out this video covering all the new spells in the same book. With that said, until next time, go out there and make some chaos.